I'm meteorologist Melissa Nord, and we are tracking newly formed Tropical Depression 3 off the Georgia coast. This is currently located 150 miles south of Charleston, South Carolina, moving north at 2 miles per hour. The pressure's not impressive. A lot of statistics about this are not impressive right now, but the hurricane hunters investigated this today and have determined it has that low-level center of circulation, and it's got the warm core, and the winds are up to classification to become a tropical depression. So it's Tropical Storm 3. This is the current 5 o'clock advisory. We will get new advisories in later on this evening, but I want to put on the kind of radar and satellite depiction, because you saw in that infrared satellite, this is infrared, look at all of the convection or thunderstorm activity really firing up late this afternoon on the eastern side of the storm. On the western side of the storm, we have more dry air. We don't see a lot of thunderstorm activity. This is a very lopsided system right now, but that's where we're tracking the heaviest rain. Now, on the western side of the system, the winds around it are going counterclockwise, so it's kind of influenced a little bit of these showers inland across the Carolinas and into southeastern Georgia as well. But this has the potential still over some decently warm waters of the Atlantic to strengthen, becoming a tropical storm. And as we look at the big picture, it will eventually become Tropical Storm Chantal. Now, I want to show you the hurricane hunters information from earlier today. So they were out investigating. It looks like they're actually currently situated. They've already flown through it. They're now going through southeastern Georgia, and they're going to make their way all the way back to Louisiana. Their base there is out near Biloxi, Mississippi. So hurricane hunters found, we'll kind of go in here and get some of the recon data fixed. But let's take off the locators. Okay, the maximum winds that they found were the flight level winds, 39 miles per hour. So that was at flight level, so not right at the surface, but you can see it was on the southeastern side of it. The center of the low is right up in here. And what they did in this particular hurricane hunter mission is they were out there to find a low-level center of circulation and sample the winds a little bit more. Now, as they're going along, we have several different types of hurricane hunter aircraft, but one of the things that they do is they also drop some different weather instruments out. So they've got tools on board the airplane, the aircraft itself. They've got radar data in the airplane. They're tracking what's happening with the pressure, the wind speed, the wind direction, all of that. And once we get all this information from the hurricane hunter planes, they plug this into some of our weather models, and that gives us a more accurate depiction of where these storms can end up heading. So that's why when we're talking about tropical systems and really any type of serious weather, the more information, the better. All that information that can be plugged into the models make them more accurate in the future. It's the butterfly effect. It's the chaos theory. If we start with a little bit of wrong information early, then the information gets even more wrong down the line. So to get that really accurate information of what's happening right now at this exact moment in the storm, that is invaluable when we talk about tropical systems causing impacts along the coastline. And right now, I mean, you look at the satellite image, you see a couple showers, it doesn't look that impressive, right? What you don't see, though, is that the winds around this are causing onshore flow to what's happening on the coast of Florida, Georgia. And eventually, as this moves to the north, we're going to have more of an offshore flow. And all of these wind directions help to enhance the threat of rip currents as we see the change in wind direction and wind speed. So we will not see this making a direct landfall in Georgia likely, but we will see impacts along the coast in terms of rip current threats. And there's a couple of enhanced showers that will be happening over the Georgia coast over the next couple of days. But going to become a tropical storm likely, and as it does so, the name will be Chantal on that. So we've already had Andrea. Andrea was that really pathetic fish storm out in the Atlantic a week and a half ago or so. And then we had Barry, that was made landfall in Mexico as a tropical storm. Now we're going to have Chantal, which would be the next name on the list. Now I'm going to show you spaghetti models. They look all over the place, don't they? Well, what I want to point out is as these start, they're all trying to figure out where's the low-level center of this. And because we just got that in from the hurricane hunters about 2 hours ago, these models are not all pinpointing the same starting point. So therefore, a lot of them are off. You can see some of these are taking it into Georgia. Some of them take it up into Charleston, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, and even a few outliers take it to Wilmington and even not even making a landfall. So the spaghetti models are kind of all over the place, but you do see this general consensus where a lot of them that start about where the center of the low actually is, have it meandering around the next 12 to 18 hours and then really getting a little bit more forward speed and getting picked up into the central South Carolina coast. So that's what you're going to see reflected on the official cone of uncertainty from the National Hurricane Center. There are tropical storm watches in effect now from Edisto Beach all the way up to Murrells Inlet up at the North Carolina-South Carolina border just north of Myrtle Beach. So that's in effect. Those will likely be upgraded to tropical storm warnings later on this evening or first thing tomorrow morning. It's going to become a tropical storm either probably early tomorrow morning. We'll see. And then doesn't have a lot of territory to continue strengthening because this is expected to make landfall by tomorrow night. So about 24 hours from now, it's going to be on its final approach already. And at that point, once it moves over land, it's cut off from those warm ocean waters. And so it's not going to be able to strengthen anymore once it moves inland. So we know this is going to become Chantal, the next tropical storm likely, or it likely will become. But I would just want you to look big picture at this track. We're on the western side of the storm here in North Georgia. We're not on the eastern side of the storm. Let's go back to the satellite presentation. Remember, the satellite data showed all of the thunderstorm activity on the eastern side of the storm. This is known as the dirty side of any of these incoming storms to the right of where the forward motion is. This is the dirty side of the storm. It picks up a lot more moisture. This is where we see more of the shower and storm activity. When we're talking about more intense hurricanes, it's that right side of the storm with the more intense wind speeds as well and the more intense storm surge. Now, in this case, with a low-end tropical storm, we're not looking at major impacts in terms of the wind speeds or the storm surge or anything. But in terms of the thunderstorm activity, where we're going to see rain falling a lot more, where there could be more impacts for beachgoers on this holiday weekend, that's going to be on the right side of the track. So it's not going to be in Georgia. Georgia, we're talking about rip current threats. We're talking about a couple of showers, but really nasty, squally, consistently bad beach weather. That's going to stay east of our state. So if you know somebody who's traveling up Charleston, Folly Beach, up through Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, up into Wilmington, even the Outer Banks, that's where things are going to get a little bit more dicey as we track a lot more of that rain moving inland. Let me put this into motion. This is our forecast track run. This is not exactly what's going to happen on the radar presentation, but what it does show you is how this could look on radar as we get closer to landfall. So we'll push this out into tomorrow. In the afternoon, you can clearly see on this model run a pretty good low-level circulation. You also see on the right side of the storm, that's where we see these kind of squall bands. These bands or squalls coming inland. So that means kind of nasty weather up through Myrtle Beach, up through Wilmington, eventually moving on shore up near the Outer Banks as well. On the Georgia side of this system, it's not high impact. There will be impacts. The rip current risk continues to stay very high through the weekend, and we will see a couple of showers, but the further north that this thing goes, the lesser and lesser the impacts will end up being. Rip currents, I think, will be the biggest impact there. We'll go into Saturday night, making landfall. This is Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, starting to move inland. You can still see on the right side of the storm, that's where we'd expect more of the squally weather, some embedded thunderstorms, any landfalling tropical system. We get a little added spin in that atmosphere. There's always a slight tornado threat as well. So all those will be watching into the Carolinas. But here in North Georgia, as this thing kind of falls apart, it's going to try to wrap around some moisture. Will it successfully bring a couple showers? It could Sunday afternoon, but we're also going to be on the drier side of that system, so most of us will end up staying dry. So a very slight chance on Sunday that there could be a shower or a sprinkle. Otherwise, the Georgia beaches will see rip currents and a couple of showers that will be likely, but the core of the winds and the really nasty weather likely going to be staying east of Chantal or Tropical Depression 3 altogether. Now, this is actually a very common place for us to see development in the month of July. This is a looking at all the years of data combined. Where do we see more development likely? And we see it in two areas. We can see things coming out of the Caribbean, going into the Gulf. We can also see, like we're seeing now, little systems form off the Atlantic coast. A lot of these can happen as we have fronts that try to dive south into Florida, little spins of low pressure develop along them. And that's really exactly what this particular system is going to do, riding up along the Georgia coastline into the coast of the Carolinas. So that's a normal area for us to see development in the month of July. Where we don't see as much development is in the main development region. And I'll just kind of show you on satellite imagery. The main development region is out in here. These tropical waves come off the coast of Africa, and sometimes, especially into August, September, October, that's the breeding ground for these seedlings that become bigger tropical systems to watch as they make their way to the Windward and Leeward Islands and beyond into the Caribbean. But we're not seeing much happening there because we've had a lot of Saharan dust. You can see there are several kind of tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa, but as they make their way into the Atlantic, there's a lot drier air. There's a lot of Saharan dust that's in there, and so that limits the development from there. So this is really the one area that we're watching right now. Remember, hurricane season continues until November 30th. We've got a long way to go. The peak of hurricane season, when we look at 100 years of data combined, when do we see the most number of tropical storms and hurricanes on the map in a given calendar year? That's September 10th. So activity really starts to pick up after August 1st through mid-September through October. By the end of October, we're really tapering off any tropical activity. It's mid-August through 1st of October, that kind of general peak few weeks, and September 10th is the peak of hurricane season. This year, NOAA is forecasting a slightly higher than average activity in the Atlantic. They're calling for a 60% chance of above normal activity with 13 to 19 named storms. We already have 2. This would make storm number 3. None of these have reached hurricane status, and we don't expect this one to reach hurricane status either. That's not unusual for us to not see a hurricane this early in the season. We see a lot more of that ramping up August, September, and into early October. So 6 to 10 hurricanes is what is forecast this year. 3 to 5 of those hurricanes reaching major hurricane status. So again, if you missed it earlier, we now have Tropical Depression 3, which is expected to become Tropical Storm Chantal, which is the 3rd name on the list for the Atlantic season. And as this becomes a tropical storm, its window to strengthen is going to be very narrow because it's going to make landfall. And that landfall will happen sometime probably around midnight, Saturday night into Sunday morning, as a low to mid-end tropical storm. And as it moves inland, it's cut off from the warm ocean waters. That's how it gets its fuel, its energy. So it will be dissipating over the Carolinas. This will not be a major system, so to speak, but it will cause in the Carolinas really squally, nasty weather with some heavy rainfall, some gusty squalls as well. And we'll track high risk of rip currents all the way from the first coast in Florida through the Georgia coast up through the outer banks of North Carolina as well. Now, while we're on this stream, I want to briefly touch on what this means for North Georgia's weekend, okay? Because we're tracking, of course, this tropical depression, but here up across North Georgia, you know, we've had a mostly dry day in the metro, but there have been a couple of isolated storms popping up over the afternoon up across the North Georgian mountains. We did have one severe thunderstorm warning, and I just want to show you, we still have some of these storms that are producing some heavy rainfall throughout towns and Union counties, and a flash flood warning. That flash flood warning right now is for Clay County in North Carolina. That is part of our viewing area. That runs until 10:30 tonight. A lot of rain has already fallen. I'll just show you the rainfall estimates from the last 24 hours. They're lagging a little bit, but they're going to come up here in just a second, hopefully. If they'll come up, well, they're not going to come up. Anyways, let me talk about fireworks weather because there we go. So estimated 2 to 3 inches of rainfall so far, and some of that rain is still coming down. Now, for fireworks weather this evening, these showers and thunderstorms should be really starting to wane and die down around sunset because we're going to be losing the daytime heating. So for fireworks weather this evening, I'm expecting temperatures in the 80s. We'll be clearing those skies out some. It's not sunny everywhere right before sunset, but if you were up in the North Georgia mountains, some clouds may still kind of linger there for the next couple of hours as we get into fireworks time. The rest of the 4th of July weekend, okay, over the 4th of July weekend, it's going to be hot. We got 93 degrees for both Saturday and Sunday. Sunday, as we track this tropical system moving inland, it is going to send some cloud cover into parts of North Georgia and a slight chance of a couple of showers. Forecast track this evening, you can see that stray shower really calming down as we lose the daytime heating. Tomorrow should be a really nice day. It's just hot outside. We're going to be up around 93 for the high. It might feel closer to 94 or 95 outside. Here's our system moving inland. You can see the winds around it bring us more of a north and northeasterly wind. This will send some clouds to North Georgia on Sunday. Will those clouds lead to rain showers? The odds are slim, but not zero. So I have added a 20% chance of a couple of showers on Sunday afternoon. I'll just pause the forecast track. I just want to move it through that kind of mid-afternoon time frame. It's trying to give us a couple of showers, but it's not going to be widespread. So if you're trying to make outdoor plans this weekend, I wouldn't bank on showers definitely happening where you are. I would just keep an ear out for that chance of showers and thunderstorms. So we have plenty of heat to go around the next 7 days, 93 Saturday and Sunday. Sunday, that very slight chance that there could be a shower out there. Monday, high of 95. And then next week, that humidity really cranks back up. That'll bring in more of a scattered daily opportunity for showers and thunderstorms Wednesday, Thursday, and even into Friday. So in the meantime, tracking heat this evening, Chantal or Tropical Depression 3, soon to become Chantal off the Georgia coast. And we get a new track coming up at 11 o'clock tonight. I'll have that for you on 11 Live News at 11.